It began in silence, in the hushed wings of a museum after hours, where only the faint hum of the security system and the echo of footsteps against polished marble lingered. The theft, when it happened, was both brutal in its efficiency and delicate in its execution. To those who discovered it, it seemed like a magic trick. One moment, priceless paintings graced the walls, the next they were gone, as though swallowed by the night itself. The newspapers called it the most audacious art heist of the century. Masterpieces, works by Vermeer, Caravaggio, and Rembrandt, vanished under the nose of the museum's vigilant guards. Investigators searched for clues but found only fragments, a cut piece of glass, a bent frame, and a faint smell of linseed oil. It was as if the paintings had chosen to flee themselves. But behind the disappearance was not just a group of opportunistic thieves. It was the culmination of decades of resentment, betrayal, and vengeance wrapped inside the cloaked world of art. The man at the heart of it was Anton Bellini, a restorer whose hands could bring life back to cracked varnish and faded colors. For years, Anton had worked in the background, a shadow in the industry of brilliance. Curators praised the genius of artists long gone, while men like Anton sweated over the preservation of their legacies. He had no name etched into plaques, no speeches given in his honor. He was a servant to beauty, nothing more. But what fueled his bitterness was not obscurity, it was betrayal. Years earlier, Anton had uncovered a forgery circulating among the wealthy elite of Europe. A supposed lost painting by Titian, paraded at auctions and whispered about in hushed tones, was in fact his own creation, made during a commission when he was young and desperate. He had been asked to recreate a work for private study, promised it would never leave the confines of a collection. Instead, it was sold and resold, praised as a rediscovered treasure, while Anton, bound by contracts and silence, watched his handiwork fetch millions. The world had celebrated his fraud as authentic, and the very men who dismissed his warnings grew rich on the back of his humiliation. That humiliation festered into rage. Rage crystallized into vengeance. The heist was not just about theft, it was about reclaiming dignity. Anton planned it meticulously, recruiting men who owed him debts, favors, or silence. They moved like ghosts, in and out of museum corridors, using knowledge only Anton possessed, which screws were weakest in the frames, which locks were never changed, where the cameras left blind spots. The paintings were taken not for ransom, not for profit, but as proof that the world of art was built on lies. For weeks, the theft dominated headlines. Billionaires panicked over their private collections. Museums fortified their walls. Interpol chased rumors across continents. Whispers spread that the stolen works had surfaced in black markets, hidden in the vaults of oligarchs. But Anton, consumed by his own sense of righteousness, did not hide them as others might. Instead, he left a trail, not obvious, but deliberate. A sketch here, a coded note there, pointing to the corruption that had buried him. It was an investigative journalist, Clara Reeve, who unraveled the puzzle. She had covered countless stories of fraud, scandal, and greed in the art world, but something about Anton's trail intrigued her. He wasn't a criminal seeking wealth. He was a man pleading to be seen, to be understood. As she dug deeper, she found the forgery scandal buried under legal red tape, Anton's name always omitted, his protests dismissed. And now, his act of vengeance had forced the art world to face its hypocrisy. The police caught Anton in a farmhouse outside Florence, surrounded not by guards or buyers, but by the very paintings he had stolen. They were leaned against walls, uncovered, lit by the gentle glow of natural light filtering through windows. He had treated them with reverence, dusting their surfaces, whispering to them like old friends. When they arrested him, he offered no resistance. His only words were, "Now they'll finally look." The trial was a spectacle, drawing crowds of critics, collectors, and scholars. Some called Anton a criminal, a madman who had endangered priceless treasures. Others called him a hero, a whistleblower who had forced the art world to confront its rotten foundations. Clara's reporting revealed what Anton could not: The duplicity of dealers, the greed of institutions, and the quiet exploitation of restorers who labored in shadows. In the end, Anton was convicted. Justice required it, the courts said. Yet something shifted. His vengeance, reckless though it was, cracked open a world too long hidden behind prestige and wealth. After his sentencing, museums were forced to admit mistakes. Collectors faced scrutiny. The very forgery that had once humiliated Anton was withdrawn from circulation, its provenance exposed as a lie. The paintings returned to their frames, but they were never quite the same. Visitors looked at them differently, not just as masterpieces, but as silent witnesses to a crime that was more than theft. It was a story of vengeance reshaped into justice, of a man who dared to remind the world that truth, like art, cannot be buried forever. Anton's name never appeared on plaques or in gilded museum halls, but whispered in corridors, passed among restorers, students, and seekers of truth, was the legacy of his act, the unbelievable crime that turned vengeance into justice and forced the art world to finally see itself. Anton's story did not end with the clang of prison doors. In fact, it was only inside those gray walls that his legend grew. The newspapers moved on to fresher scandals, but in academic circles, in the underground networks of collectors and scholars, his crime became a ghost that refused to vanish. Letters began to pour into the prison, not just from journalists like Clara, but from art students, young restorers, and even professors who had once dismissed him. They wanted to know how he had done it, how he had outsmarted security teams, curators, and international agencies. But more than that, they wanted to hear the philosophy behind his madness. Why had he risked everything not for profit, but for principle? Anton answered sparingly, often scribbling notes that read like fragments of confession. Art is not property, it is memory. Or, what is justice when truth is treated as forgery? His words spread quietly, quoted in journals, debated in classrooms. Some argued he was dangerous, a romanticizing of crime. Others saw him as a prophet of sorts, a man who had shown how thin the line was between reverence and corruption. Meanwhile, Clara Reeve continued to write about him. She visited him regularly, documenting his reflections, pushing him to explain what had driven him beyond the limits of the law. Anton never claimed to be innocent. He knew he had broken the law, endangered heritage. But he insisted that the art world was built on crimes just as deep. Fakes, lies, exploitation, and that his heist was nothing more than a mirror held up to that reality. Clara's book, From Vengeance to Justice, became a sensation. It framed Anton not as a mere thief, but as the architect of a reckoning. In the aftermath, a strange thing began to happen. Museums and galleries, eager to distance themselves from the shame of Anton's revelations, began giving greater recognition to the invisible workers, the restorers, conservators, archivists, who had for centuries been relegated to obscurity. Exhibitions started crediting not only the artist, but also the names of those who had preserved the work across centuries. It was as if Anton's shadow had forced them to finally acknowledge the quiet hands that had safeguarded beauty. And yet, Anton remained behind bars, older now, his once steady hands beginning to tremble. He painted again, but only on scraps of paper, sketches smuggled out by sympathetic guards. They were not masterpieces, not even finished works, just fragments, an eye, a hand, a cracked vase, always incomplete. Some believed these sketches were his way of speaking from confinement, fragments of himself scattered into the world. There were whispers, too, of hidden works. Rumors spread that Anton had not revealed everything, that somewhere, perhaps in a forgotten cellar in Florence, or buried behind false walls in an abandoned villa, lay paintings he had taken but never surrendered. Interpol denied it. The courts dismissed it. But collectors and hunters chased those rumors like moths to flame, each hoping to uncover the lost treasure of Anton's vengeance. Nothing was ever found, though the myth of the hidden gallery persisted, feeding documentaries, novels, and whispered conversations in the back rooms of auctions. Years later, when Anton finally died in his cell, his funeral was small, almost anonymous. No gilded caskets, no marble tomb. Just a modest grave, unmarked except for a simple stone etched with his name. And yet, his story refused to rest. For in the quiet halls of museums, visitors still paused a little longer before the masterpieces once stolen, their eyes tracing the frames, wondering if justice could ever fully undo vengeance. The unbelievable crime of the art world was never about the theft itself, but about what it revealed. That truth, however deeply buried, has a way of clawing its way into the light. And though Anton Bellini's hands were stilled, the echoes of his act lived on, in whispers, in brushstrokes, in the uneasy silence between beauty and betrayal. Even after Anton's death, his presence refused to vanish. For many, he became less a man and more a ghostly question mark hanging over the art world. Journalists still wrote about him, students cited him in theses, and even detectives, men and women hardened by years of chasing thieves and smugglers, admitted that Anton's heist had changed the way they thought about crime. Clara Reeve, now an established author and documentary filmmaker, kept Anton's memory alive through her relentless pursuit of what she called the shadow market. In her research, she uncovered a web of corrupt dealers and fraudulent provenance documents that had survived untouched for decades. Anton had told her once, in the corner of a prison cell, "Every forgery is a mirror. It reflects not just the painter, but the greed of the man who buys it." Clara used that line to open her second book, and it became a rallying cry for a new generation of critics who demanded transparency from the art establishment. But while the academic world dissected Anton's motives, something stranger was happening in the criminal underworld. His name became legend, whispered in the same breath as the great heists of history. Smugglers and thieves admired him not for the money he made, since he never made any, but for the statement he carved into the bones of the industry. Young thieves began styling themselves as disciples of Bellini, pulling off smaller thefts across Europe, sometimes leaving behind fragments of sketches or slips of paper quoting Anton's cryptic words. Whether these acts were tributes or cheap imitations, no one could say. Interpol grew uneasy. To them, Anton had lit a fuse. He had shown that even the most fortified museums could be breached, and he had inspired a cult-like following. In secret reports, investigators referred to what they called the Bellini effect, a surge in art thefts justified not by greed, but by ideology. Thieves claimed they were liberating paintings from corrupt dealers or punishing collectors who had hidden treasures away from the public eye. Some even returned stolen works to small museums and signed, as if performing an act of twisted justice. Meanwhile, Clara found herself haunted by one question: had Anton really revealed all of the stolen works? His confession at the farmhouse had been convincing, his surrender calm. Yet Clara remembered the glint in his eyes when she pressed him about the possibility of hidden caches. "The truth," he had whispered once, "is never whole. It always lives in fragments." She couldn't let that go. Her suspicions reignited years later when, in a dusty gallery in Buenos Aires, a forgotten crate was opened during renovation. Inside lay a canvas attributed to Rembrandt, believed destroyed centuries earlier. The style, the pigments, the brushwork, it all matched. But tucked into the frame was something more astonishing, a scrap of parchment with Anton's handwriting. Just 3 words, "Do you see?" The discovery rocked the world. Was this proof that Anton had concealed more than anyone knew? Or was it another forgery, a final trick from a man who had spent his life blurring the line between truth and lie? Experts divided into camps. Some declared it genuine, others called it a hoax. But for Clara, it was confirmation. Anton had never fully surrendered. Somewhere, perhaps scattered across the globe, fragments of his other collection remained, hidden like buried confessions waiting to be unearthed. The art world was left uneasy, and for good reason. Every new discovery, every lost work that appeared in a private collection or resurfaced in a small-town gallery was now scrutinized through the lens of Anton's legacy. Was it real? Was it stolen? Was it planted? His ghost had infected the very act of looking. Collectors whispered in fear. Museums tightened their security even further. But for the public, there was a strange thrill in it. Every painting carried a question, a mystery, a secret war between vengeance and justice. Clara, older now, still walked the halls of museums with Anton's voice in her ears. She often paused before the paintings he had once taken, imagining them leaning against the walls of that farmhouse in Florence, touched not by guards or curators, but by the trembling hands of a man who wanted the world to see. And in quiet moments, when she stood before those works, she wondered if Anton had truly been defeated, or if, in some impossible way, he had won.